Welcome back, Tiger fans, to Rockin' Radio's football podcast. I'm Nate Edwards. That's Brandon BK Kiley. This is Before the Box Score, the Looking at Our Faces edition. Welcome to YouTube. If you are listening to this in your traditional, podcast feed, congratulations. Nothing is different. I'm sure we sound just as good as we always do. You can hear us talk about Missouri football like you normally do. For you all who are joining us on YouTube, yes, this is what we look like. And this is what it looks like when words come out of our mouth. It's really weird. And as someone who has, worked remotely for 10 years now, it does make a difference when you see how somebody acts when they talk versus just their words. So yes, BK is always that handsome. And yes, I'm always this sweaty. BK, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to be here live and semi-in-person, basically the COVID version of in-person. That's what we're doing here. Everybody decided, hey, Zoom's a thing now. And that's essentially what this is. So it's great to be here, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have our first voyage into the YouTube world for Beyond the Box Score. It's historic, I guess, if you will. But yeah, we're going to just jump into it and treat this like any other show because it is. However, unlike most shows, there's not really a whole lot going on. And I think that's kind of the byproduct of college football in April, where you just don't have a lot going on. If things are going on, it's recruiting based, maybe coaching based, roster talk, that sort of stuff. And guess what? That's what our show's going to be about. So we'll start off with some unofficially official news. If you remember, about a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks at this point, there was word that dropped that Missouri had actually hired an offensive line coach. His name is Brandon Jones, used to work for Houston, used to work for Texas Tech. He is actually a pretty highly related offensive line coach. Less so on the offensive coordinator department, but that's not why we hired him. We hired him to talk to the 5 dudes that protect all the skill position players on the offensive side. Now, it has not been officially announced yet. I don't know if they are waiting for him to be on campus and he is walking here, and so it's taking 3,000 days to do it, or if there's some kind of contract negotiation that's going weird. Couldn't tell you. Have no news on that. But for all intents and purposes, we believe that Brandon Jones will be Missouri's next offensive line coach. BK, what do we think about this?
So a little bit of context on why this isn't announced yet. I think most of the coaches were on vacation because this is the time when they're able to do that because it's the dead period for the transfer portal. There's really no recruiting news to happen at this time of the year in the high school side of things. So I think that's why it hasn't been officially announced yet. It's just because they want Drinkwitz to be in town whenever this thing is announced, and he's, I don't think, in town right now, or wasn't in town at least. So I think that's part of it as to why it hasn't been announced officially yet. I like the hire. The biggest reason why I like the hire is because there's no obvious connections to Drinkwitz in the past. And that's not to suggest you're a bad coach because you coached with Eli Drinkwitz previously, but it's kind of the friends and family thing, right? If you're an NFL fan, you've seen Bill Belichick, and part of the demise of him is he's hired his friends and his family. It's just a bunch of dudes that have been coaching with Belichick for the last 20 years at this point. He's got a 7-man staff, which is different than everybody else in the NFL. I think 2 of them are his kids, and 3 of them are guys that have been with him for 20 years. So, he has no new blood. There's no new ideas. There's nothing fresh about what they're doing in New England. The reason I bring that up with Columbia and Mizzou is because that's kind of Eli Drinkwitz MO in the past. Is you look at the Arkansas State staffs that he was a part of, you look at the Auburn staff that he was a part of, and you say, okay, these are the 35 guys that Eli Drinkwitz has a history with, regardless of position. That's probably a pretty good idea of what the pool of candidates is going to be for who's going to hire at Mizzou. And this is not a guy that he's worked with in the past. As far as we know, there's no obvious history of Brandon Jones working with anybody that I can find on Missouri staff. So he's just a guy that they targeted and said, hey, this guy's highly qualified, he's available, and we need somebody to coach our offensive line. Well, let's go get the best guy that's available. I love that. You should hire guys that are qualified and good at what they do. And based on all reports and people that would know these types of things, it seems like Brandon Jones is a really highly thought of, highly regarded offensive line coach. I can't pretend as if I know a lot about Brandon Jones. I wasn't watching a ton of Houston's offensive line and breaking them down game to game and knowing exactly what they were being asked to do to be able to do that effectively. But Bruce Feldman, who is as plugged in as anybody in college football, tweeted out, Mizzou's getting a good O-line coach in Brandon Jones. He developed 2 sophomores into all AAC linemen in 2022. Houston probably did the best job of anybody in slowing down Texas Tech's Tyree Wilson, who's expected to be a top 5 draft pick this spring. So, as an offensive line coach, seems to be pretty good. As a recruiter, seemed to get pretty decent talent on campus at Houston. As an OC, not so good, and that's why he was no longer at Houston. Thankfully for Mizzou, they've got their OC. They've got a head coach that dabbles in that side of thing as well. All you need is for him to be really good at coaching the offensive line, and it seems like he's qualified to do that.
Yeah. I mean, Houston's rushing success rate last year was 46%. That's 40th in the nation. The line's ability to get the running backs 4 yards was 54%. That's 7th in the country. Just as a reminder, Missouri was at 48, so that would be a huge improvement. Power success rate was about as good as Missouri's, honestly, 68%, which is fine, whatever. Their stuff rate, 16%, was actually pretty good. You know, we can go through this and look at everything, you know, like how many times did they get sacked per dropback? Well, it was 4%. That's top 25, right? You know, like there are things that you can look at and say, okay, you know, this is a good hire or this is a bad hire. I will point out that they got penalized a lot. The only offensive line that got penalized worse than Missouri, frankly. But they didn't allow a lot of pressures. The thing is that you go off of rep. And we talked about this the last show. It's less about, you know, oh, well, is what he did prior going to immediately translate to Missouri? No, that's not true for any hire that you make. You look at the resume, you see what he's played with, and if you think that he can work in your system and work with the guys that you have, you make the hire, just flat out. We said you got to find a good offensive line coach. Don't need to find a good recruiter. Don't need to find a good coordinator. Find a good offensive line coach. And by at least the industry is saying they found a good one. So yes, I'm excited about that. He was also in demand by several schools, which I like that. I like when someone has a lot of people who want to hire him. And then your favorite school gets to hire him. So in the end, you know, there are a lot of things that you can point to and say, I like it. There are some things you can point to and say, I don't like it. And that's fine. We are going to find out in September, really probably not even halfway through the year, whether this was a good hire or not. And even then, given the things that he is playing with, all the pieces he's playing with, we still might not know if he's all that great until we get a year or two into this. But we have a guy. He's going to be working for us. He's going to be working with the offensive line, and people like him. So on the offseason checklist, I think that's about as much as you can ask for.
Agreed. The other thing is, like, if you're looking at the pass blocking production, and some of this is a Dana Holgorsen holdover, like his offenses just tend to be really good on the passing side of things. But it's worth noting they had some of the best pass blocking offensive lines in the country over the last few years. And if you're looking at one area that you'd like to be good as an offensive line, it's keeping your quarterback upright. So whatever he's doing, whatever worked for him at Houston, if he could bring some of that to Mizzou, I'm not going to be upset about it.
No, absolutely not. Now, one thing that we did mention in the last show, and I think a couple of people have made the same joke, and I have lumped my name in there too, was can he bring a center with him? Whoever they hire, can he bring a center to Missouri? And frankly, I don't think we have an exact answer out there. However, BK, you said that there is a gentleman from Houston, maybe two, who are currently in the portal who might follow their old friend to Missouri. What do you have for us?
Yeah, so a gentleman by the name of Cameron Johnson. He was a first-team All-AAC. He was one of those players that I mentioned, guard last year at the University of Houston. He is excellent, like really, really, really good as a player, and he has entered the transfer portal. Now, he has a lot of options. He has already claimed on Twitter that he has offers from Cal, Maryland, Arkansas, South Carolina, West Virginia, Arizona State. I'm sure that's not the entirety of the list. He has also claimed that he got offered by Mizzou. That came on March 10th. It is now April 4th. That happened before it was at least announced publicly that his coach was going to be the next offensive line coach at Missouri. There's obviously a history there. I would imagine that Cameron Johnson is leaving Houston, A, to win, and B, because he wants to play in a bigger and potentially better conference. to test his ability to play at the highest level because he wants to go to the NFL. He wants to prove to the league that, hey, I'm a guy that you should draft highly in next year's draft. So is this a guy that would be interested in Missouri? I don't know. I would hope so. I mean, they've got an obvious connection there. He has more than 1,500 career snaps. That's something that appeals to me. He was quite good in those 1,500 snaps. That's also appealing to me. It's hard not to see the upgrade that he could offer to you. If you added him to the mix, you've got Javon Foster, Armand Mimbu, Marcellus Johnson, and Cameron Johnson, as 4 of your 5 starters. I feel really good about all 4 of those guys starting somewhere along your offensive line going into next year. That's 2 transfers. Mimbu, who's coming back for his sophomore season. He was very good as a freshman in his limited opportunities. And Foster, who's just super solid for you at tackle. You still have a problem at center, but now you could try out Delgado or Ndoma Ogar or Tollison, Polgar. You've got options there at center. And then this brings us to the other Houston recruit that is currently in the transfer portal as well. Chase Todd. Now, this is an unheralded guy. I have no idea what Missouri's new offensive line coach thinks about him because he frankly didn't play a whole lot at Houston. So maybe he's just not interested in him, didn't think he was very good there, doesn't want him to bring him to Mizzou. That's possible. He was a 2-star recruit out of the Houston area. There's no obvious connection to the Tigers other than the fact that they have his former offensive line coach. But he tweeted out some of his huddle film, both from practice and then also what he had to offer in games as well. He did play center for Houston. He was listed at guard, but he did get real opportunities at center, especially in practice. I mean, he's athletic, and he seems to hold up pretty well in pass pro. I don't think he's worse than what you have currently on the roster. And so if you just wanted to do a package deal of let's take one more guy and see what he's got, throw him into the competition, I've heard way worse ideas and way worse ways to go about this than that. So I know they've got a little bit of a scholarship crunch, but he's somebody that I would be interested in, honestly.
I mean, if he's not a clear look, college coaches figure this stuff out. That's why they get paid $1 billion. Roster management. If he's not a clear-cut upgrade over what you already have,
I think he's an upgrade over your current centers. I don't know, can Ndoma Ogar or Delgado play center? I don't know the answer to that question. Is he an upgrade over those 2 if they can make that transition? That I'm not sure of. Is he better than Tollison or Polgar, given what the comments have been about those 2 this spring and what we saw from Tollison last year? That I'm pretty confident in.
Yeah. He's certainly bigger, or at least fatter in the butt. So I don't know. If they're best friends, and they need the BFF package, yeah, just fine, whatever. We'll figure it out.
Can I interest you in a Cameron Johnson, though?
I mean, yes, I am personally interested in a Cameron Johnson, and I would give you several offensive linemen that we currently have for him, just to go bye, go away. So that is not a deal for me. But yeah, I mean, again, Missouri has 5 scholarships over the limit to my count. I can't tell you if anybody got taken off, put back on walk-on status or whatever, but to my count, that's 90, and they're 5 over where they need to be. So, you got to trim some fat. The May transfer portal opens up, and I'm sure you will see 5 guys leave or however many leave, and then we get to bring on everybody who we're going to bring on. It is a position of need. It's right up there with defensive end. It's right up there with probably running back. But it's definitely number 1 because you need to find someone who can coach the line, be the leader of the line, and free everybody up to do what they do best. I think that's the biggest thing. We can move pieces around. You can find guys who can do this. And it sounded like at the end of spring, they were trying out folks at center just to see what they had. But it goes back to what you and I have talked about before. Your best position versus your best 5. Mm-hmm. And if you can put someone who is actually good at center in that position and free everybody up to do everything else and not have to worry about that, that is where you need to be. And so whatever that looks like, I'm sure the staff has been thinking about it constantly, especially Jones as he's coming on. How do I fix this line? How do I get it to where we need to be? Cameron Johnson makes a lot of sense. Haven't really seen anybody else in the portal that at least intrigues me. So we will see what happens. But I would be good with Johnson. And if he's a package deal, then we'll work around that. But, first and foremost, get that center. That's going to be the big one.
I'm with you. And if they could go get anything, like even if you can't get a center in the portal, Cameron Johnson will make the center next to him better. Like if there was a weak spot not at center last year, it was probably left guard, and Xavier Delgado like was fine. But if you look into any of the grades, especially on Pro Football Focus or anything like that, or if you go a little deeper into what happened with him at guard last year, it was up and down. He was fine. Like you can get by with that guy as a starter for you, but you're always looking to upgrade from him. Kind of like a fifth starter in a pitching rotation in Major League Baseball. Like you can get by with whoever, really, as long as they're giving you 5 solid innings from time to time. But you always kind of want to upgrade that player, and that's kind of how I feel about Delgado. He's fine, but
I mean, would you say he is replacement level, or do you think he's below?
Yeah, right. I think he's
like Chris Turner, right?
The
favorite defensive end.
Exactly. Like if he's out there, are you gonna notice him a ton? No, and like as an offensive lineman, that's probably a good thing, but you're also not noticing him for anything positive. He's just basically stalemates all day long.
Well, it is a work in progress. And boy, I mean, Missouri is doing their best to bring in interesting offensive linemen, talented offensive linemen. It's just they're all wee babies who are in the gun club and trying to bulk up and learn to play line in the SEC. So I think Eli Drinkwitz said sometime in the spring, he's like, look, man, we're in the market for an SEC caliber offensive line. That guy exists. He's got 50,000 offers from every other school out there. Like that's just, everybody's looking for that. Even if you're not looking for that, you're looking for that. So it is one of the toughest positions to grade coming out of high school and then to get out of the portal, just because everybody needs an upgrade on whoever they have at all times. So it's going to be rough. But if you trust the process, trust Eli Drinkwitz, and trust that the various Mizzou NIL funds have some money to throw around, all right, we can work around that. We can make it happen. So let's talk about the future a little bit more, because I had a piece that dropped today. One of my favorite things to do, this is something that Bill C has done before, is returning production. And returning production in Bill C's world, and advanced analytics world, it's not about who you bring back. It's about what you bring back. And he's been tooling around with these numbers since 2007, 2008. A lot of data on it, and he tries to figure out, of all the stats out there, what is the most predictive of improvement or regression. And then he weights that, and he looks at everything that comes back. You throw in transfers in there, see who left, and boom, you spit out a number. And it tells you, all right, so this is how much is coming back. Here's where that ranks against everybody else. Now, when we were doing this last year, so this was the end of the 2021 season going into 2022, Missouri's returning production was not all that great. In fact, if you look at it, Missouri ranked like 65th, I want to say. 68th, 65% overall, 68th. 105th in offense and 30th in defense. Well, last year, Missouri's offense stunk, and Missouri's defense was pretty good. So maybe there is something to that returning production number, especially when you're considering transfers get lumped in there. Now, this year, it's a lot better. In fact, Missouri has currently the 9th best returning production in the country, second in the SEC behind Texas A&M. So, what does that mean? Well, the good news is that teams who return around 80% of last year's production tend to improve by about 4 or 5 spots in SP+. What does that mean? Well, Missouri was at a 9 last year. That could take them to a 14, maybe a 15. Teams that are in the 14-15 range, well, I can tell you one off the bat, Ole Miss. Did you like Ole Miss last year?
I was into that, yeah.
They were pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Now, Oklahoma was in that group too, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the positives. Oregon State, which went 10-3. Illinois, which went 8-5.
Honestly, I would sign up right now for Illinois season last year. They had some big wins. They had an interesting season. They had a real chance to be able to take down Michigan. Like they probably should have beat Michigan, honestly. Got a couple of bad calls that went against them, and they were a super fun team. They couldn't throw the football, but that's beside the point.
Well, neither can Missouri, right? The entire time we've been here, Missouri's not been able to throw the ball, so we're very comfortable with that. Point is that if you return a lot of production, you tend to improve. Now, there are outliers and everything like that, but from at least the macro view, that is true. So Missouri's in a very interesting point right here. Keep in mind, Missouri returned almost 80% of their returning production from 16 going to 17, and they improved like 10 spots. And they did it again, 17 to 18, and improved 9 spots. And in fact, that 18 team was one of the best teams in the SP Plus era. So this is, all of this is saying, the better you are, the higher you are in returning production, the better chance you have of improving. And we have seen it happen in Columbia. So if you're talking about positivity, this is one of those things. Here's the rub, BK, because there's got to be context behind it. You might return a bunch of dudes who threw the ball around, but which one are you going to start? You might return a lot of guys on the offensive line, but which 5 are you going to start? And I think looking at this, when I was doing this exercise, yes, I can see without context that Missouri returns a lot, but knowing this team like we do and like the fans do, it all comes down to who's starting. So do you view this as a net positive, a net negative, or we'll see?
I think it's positive because, like, your worst case scenario is that you returned the guys that were at worst fine a year ago, and you have the potential to upgrade from them, right? So, like, we can go through individually. At quarterback, Brady Cook was fine last year. He was the middle of the pack, right? He was a perfectly replacement level, to use your term from earlier, quarterback in the SEC. He can run. At times he looked good throwing. At other times he looked like a liability throwing, just depending on the week. But if he's your starting quarterback this upcoming year, you can be okay as we saw a year ago. But you also have other options. You've got Jake Garcia. You've got Siam Horn that could come in and give you an upgrade. Or be worse. You don't know. It's a mystery box. It's the whole, like, you could have a boat or you could have this mystery box. And the mystery box might even be a boat. We don't know yet. That's why we've got the mystery box. At running back, that is the one spot where it's kind of a meh for me. Like, you returned Cody Schrader and Nathaniel Pete. Cool. Could I see more Tavoris Jones, though? Like, if you could see more of that, that sounds interesting to me. On the offensive line, we just went through all of that. Like, I think 3 guys at a pretty high level going into the season. And then it's just a question of, like, what do you get from the other 2 spots? Who's starting in those 2 spots? Can you bring in a Cameron Johnson? Wide receivers may be where it's most interesting to me. And this is where I wanted to ask you a follow-up on this. You're losing out on Dominic Lovett, and that was basically your wide receiver position from last year. Luther Burden, I think, and this is going to be my, like, strong stance going into the year, and I'm sure that I'm not out on an island. Like, I'm sure a lot of people will believe this, but I believed going into last year that Dominic Lovett was in for a big year. A lot of that was because of what we saw from the spring game. Now, we did not see a spring game this year, unfortunately, but my guess is you will see a similar jump from Luther Burden this year that we saw from Lovett last year, and it's because, A, he's super talented, and B, he's moving inside. It's just easier to win from the slot than it is to win from outside. So I think Luther Burden's going to be fine there. How do you feel about the receiver position specifically when it comes to their returning production?
I mean, it's when you look at successful teams, the successful teams are the ones that are good with throwing the ball. Offense, throwing it to a receiver, defense, breaking those passes up. And a lot of that comes with experience. And Missouri does not have a lot of that. Now, Luther Burden's in his 2nd year, right? Mookie Cooper is like, a 4th year, but his 3rd year on campus. True. Mekhi Miller, very, very intriguing. Peanut Houston, intriguing. But that's all you got. We're banking on, we're banking on Luther Burden making the Lovett leap. We're banking on it. Theo Weiss is an interesting addition. He had 34 targets last year. Dennis Jackson, interesting addition. Didn't play last year. So it's very mixed. You're going to have experience and you're going to have production, but Missouri under Eli Drinkwitz has never had a dynamic passing game. And whether that's by purpose, design, or just talent, it's just not been there. And he has done his best. Eli Drinkwitz has done his best to try to replicate Lovett with a bunch of different guys. But we're going to really miss Barrett Bannister. I know it's not going to feel like that. I know he was not the most dynamic pass catcher. We're going to miss him. And Towski Dove, he was a hell of a run blocker. And I hope that there's some other receiver out there who can run block his ass off, because that's what Missouri does. And Towski was really good at blocking for that. So I I feel mixed. I think if each player, not hit their ceiling, but if each player can deliver, right? Like just give me a median performance week after week after week after week. I think Missouri will be okay. But you're banking on a lot of things that are just not guaranteed to happen. And we still don't know which quarterback is going to be throwing the ball. We're not sure who's going to be up front on offensive line. So receiver is important, but I feel like it's the third most important thing on a long list of very important things that we got to figure out first.
Yeah, I think like if Burden falls into place and he's a guy that can be a like number one target with a bullet, he's a legit number one weapon in the SEC. Everything else from there becomes a secondary concern where it's like, all right, we've got the number one guy. As long, honestly, in college football, if you've got a guy in the slot that can win on his own and can either A, win after the catch in a significant way, and I think Burden can do that, or B, create separation down the field to make an open window for your quarterback, you could do pretty well with just that. Because you can scheme other guys open. You'll get Theo Weiss on a few big plays throughout the course of the season. You'll have some Mookie Cooper yards after catch on some of those bubble routes. Like you'll get opportunities for Mekhi Miller going across the middle. That stuff will just, by scheme, it'll come open for them. You need at least one guy, though, that can really go out there and get his. And they had that last year with Dominic Lovett. As long as Burden can replace that, I think he'll be okay. I, too, have some of those questions about, like, third down. Who's your go-to guy? What do you do to win on 3rd and 6? Because this team last year, you get into a third down situation, and it's one of two things. It's either Dom Lovett or it's Barrett Bannister. Neither of those guys are back. So what is it now? Is it Luther Burden or Mookie Cooper? Is it Luther Burden or Mekhi Miller? Is it Luther Burden or we're running with a quarterback? Like, you've got options there. Things could emerge, and it could be better than it was last year in that situation. But that's probably the biggest question for me is, can Luther become that number one guy, and do you have another option on third down?
I mean, truly, on 3rd and 6, Missouri ran the ball. That's what they usually did.
Which is bad. Like, it's a bad process.
It's not good.
Not do that.
You did not have a good run blocking line, and you did not have a very good running back. And you
This is what Kirby's here for. Kirby's here because he doesn't want to run on third down. He doesn't want to get into third and 6.
No.
And B, he doesn't want to run when he's in those situations. I can tell you after watching a few of their games, based on their personnel and what Missouri's personnel is, he ain't running on 3rd and 6 very often. I don't think that's going to be happening. You're going to see a lot of Luther Burden over routes on 3rd and 6. That's what you'll see. A lot of that.
Yeah. That is exactly what I want. But yeah, I don't know. Mekhi Miller, I felt like he really started earning more targets as the year went on. And I don't,
For that Florida game?
yeah,
Quarter? Like,
I don't recall like a ton of third down targets because Barrett Bannister was still around, but he did deliver. Like in the bowl game, it was Mekhi Miller making those plays. So again, you can't bank on a sophomore. That's not what you want to do, but that's kind of where we're leaning. And if Dennis Jackson wants to be awesome, like he's just not had a lot of reps at the SEC level. He's a very intriguing athlete, but as far as proven stuff, not there. So yeah, you need some guys to step up, and you need to step them up in specific roles that Missouri kind of leaned on last year, and that's not there. So I am cautiously optimistic that these receivers can blossom in a new coordinator system. Not new, but like a new guy calling the plays. Your star player being in a way more comfortable position, a better spot than he should have been last year, and hoping that the, let's say, creativity of the offense allows for a lot of things to open up and allow the receivers to do what they do a lot better than what we were doing last year, which was, again, running on third down. So cautiously optimistic is where I'm at, regardless of what returning production says. So on defense, though, Missouri returns basically everything. And it's really interesting because you look at those weights and, Bill has kind of shaken them out kind of over the years, like 40 here, 30 here, whatever. No, not this year. This year, he has decided that based off of his projections, about 70% of a defensive returning production weight is just tackles made. Tackles made. Yeah. And the good news is that Missouri is returning 76.5% of all of their tackles. Things that don't make a huge difference. Sacks, 4%. Tackles for loss, 12%. In fact, the only thing that's over 12% is passes defense, which is sitting at 14%. So it is truly, are you on the field making tackles? If you are doing that, you are probably going to succeed in the following year if you return a bunch of that. And again, Missouri returns a bunch of that outside of defensive end. So, I mean, BK, it feels great. That's why Missouri's defensive return production is so high, because the things that they are missing, like sacks, don't really count a whole lot as far as projecting success. So, again, we thought we were going to be good about the defense. We felt good about it, and the numbers back that up. Does that make you happy?
It does. I am still a little concerned about the edge rush position. Now, that being said, I think something to keep in mind is that Blake Baker is a guy that can create havoc without having guys that do it on their own. And what I mean by that is, like, think back to the Georgia game, for example. I don't think Missouri's defensive ends were just out there, like, dominating on their own against NFL caliber offensive tackles on every down. I think what you saw is Blake Baker found a way to scheme that up. He's going to find a way to get Tyron Hopper on blitz opportunities. He's going to find a way to get this Newsom kid that's coming from JUCO and is apparently excellent. He's going to get him on the field. And where's he going to be utilized? I don't know. I think he's going to be a third down, like, dime/nickel linebacker that comes in very specific situations to either rush the passer or drop into coverage, because that's what he's good at. So I think you're going to see him being able to utilize the players in the right way, and that makes up for a lack of obvious pass rush coming from the edge position. So that makes me feel better about it. And then, like, in the past, and this is why I'm a little surprised by the way that Bill's going about it. Now, it makes sense in theory, but I know that he always put a pretty significant impact on just your defensive backs. That's where the returning production really matters.
Yeah.
And when you look at what Missouri has coming back in the defensive backfield, like, that matters to me, man. It's really just, do you believe that Dalen Carnell can step up and be a legitimate starter? And for me, I absolutely do. I think he's a potential future NFL player at that position. So I feel really good about where they're at defensively, and I trust their defensive coordinator. I have very few questions other than what they're going to get edge rush-wise on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. I mean, Missouri's returning 95% of their passes defensed, 55% of their sacks, 69% of tackles for loss, and then, of course, 76% of their tackles. Question for you, BK, and this is a quiz. Yes, I will give you the answer at the end. We know who led the team in sacks. You can look that up, not a problem. However, if you had to guess, who do you think were the top three in quarterback pressures for Missouri's defense last year?
Quarterback pressures. That's interesting. I would say Coleman was up there.
He was number 3. Yep.
I feel like this is a trick question, because I want to say McGuire, but I feel like you're going to...
It's not a trick question. Right. McGuire was number 1. He had 27 pressures on the year. Not a trick question. Who do you think was number 2? You got McGuire and you got Coleman.
My guess is it was somebody along the interior. Was it Robinson?
So Darius Robinson finished with 15 pressures. He was 4th.
Okay, so that's close. Was Christian Williams on this list?
Christian Williams is on the list. He only had 6, so that puts him at, like...
Who was 2? Who was 2?
Well, it's a guy who still plays for Missouri. His name was Tyron Hopper.
Oh, that makes sense. I didn't even, of course.
And I did not... I know he was sent for, obviously he was a very havoc-y kind of guy. I know he was sent a lot. He had 117 plays in which he rushed the quarterback, which is about 29% of the time he was rushing the quarterback. He had 3 sacks, which is good. He had 22 quarterback pressures. That is an 18% pressure rate. Just as a frame of reference, Will Anderson was getting pressures on the quarterback last year 23% of the time.
So to be like a top 5 pick in this year's draft, and was like undoubtedly a top 10 defensive player in the sport.
Yeah. And Tyron Hopper was just a little bit below him as a linebacker. So now you can argue what Will Anderson's position actually was, but he was get the quarterback. That was his position. And Tyron Hopper only did that some of the time. and his percentage of doing that was almost as good as basically a surefire first-round pick. So I don't know why Tyron Hopper's coming back. I understand that the actual numbers aren't there. You know, it kind of waxed and waned, kind of depending on your opponent, which that's going to be true for a lot of players. But the dude will make you go boom. And he got a lot of pressures, and even if he didn't connect for sacks, he was a disruptive piece. And now if you add Tristan Newsome to this, if you still have Chad Bailey, who was a relatively disruptive dude on his own, and you have Darius Robinson playing on the outside and a bunch of defensive tackles who can generate pressure up the middle, which is the best place to do it, I would love a disruptive end. Don't get me wrong, but I still feel okay, and that's probably going to be my downfall. Maybe Joe Moore finally puts it together. Maybe the Walker boys are just as good as we think they could be. But if you don't get one, I'm not upset, just because there's so many other guys who can do it. And like you said, this is Blake Baker's thing. He creates pressure no matter who he has. But yeah, if you're talking about priorities, I don't think it would be high. It's up there. But not having a proven pass rusher at end is just, it's a little weird. It's a little weird.
Yeah, and it's tough to go into the season with a whole lot of confidence without having that guy. Like, especially in Mizzou, right? Because we're so used to having like a guy at least that's coming back with like legit returning production or projects to be a future NFL player, and to not really have that this year, at least on the edge, it's weird. It's strange. It feels uncomfortable. The other thing that I would add is, like, as an offensive coordinator, one of your worst nightmares is a defensive coordinator who could bring pressure from anywhere on any play. And so it almost, like, by necessity forces Blake Baker to utilize one of his best assets, which is teams don't know where the pressure's coming from. Like, Tyron Hopper could be coming on any given play. Chad Bailey has shown he can blitz on any given play. You could have some kind of a stunt coming from the D tackle and the end that are looping. Like, there's a lot of stuff that they can do along the defensive line to cause havoc without having an edge rusher that's doing it just the typical way of bending the edge and getting to the quarterback.
Yeah. Barry Odom, for all of his faults, he fielded a very disruptive defense 2 years in Mizzou, and he was trotting out Chris Turner and Jordan Howard. Nothing against those guys, but like, they were not disruptive pieces. You can do it. It can be done. It feels weird. Like you said, Mizzou should have awesome pass rushers, but we will see. We will see. To close it out, let's talk NIL. Let's talk parity, because we are sitting in a world where Florida Atlantic and San Diego State were in the Final Four. And I feel like most of the time when college basketball things happen, the question always goes, well, can that happen in football? Can that happen in football? And I fielded a couple emails in the past couple of weeks, people asking questions along the lines of, like, does the transfer portal or NIL, does that mean that Missouri can do this in football? Does it mean Missouri can do this in basketball? Does it mean that coaches no longer have that leash of building a program? And I think to a certain extent, like, yeah, it's different, but basketball is such a different sport because it takes two guys to be awesome. And football, you need 22 dudes to be awesome. So, BK, you saw something interesting on the Twitter machine. I want you to take it from here and kind of walk us through it.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I think that there's a lot of people that are coming up with some kind of scenario where, like, hey, NIL transfer portal, it's going to make so much parity in college football. And the guy that I saw this from was Shaman Terry of On3. He posted it. In theory, like, I kind of get where he's coming from, because he's basically saying, like, hey, the transfer portal means that those guys that aren't getting the opportunities for NIL could end up going elsewhere. And, like, in theory, that makes some sense. But like you said, you need like 20 of those dudes. Like, you need a large roster that's coming in on any given season to be able to sustain that kind of a thing. I think it's just so much more on the college basketball side. First of all, it's cheaper. Like, you have 13 roster spots that you have available to you. So if you have 3 game changers, and we see this with Arkansas every year, where they just bring in like 3 dudes, like legit players, and it's just a matter of, like, are they good? If they end up being really good at Arkansas, that Arkansas team's going to be excellent for Eric Musselman. Now, they don't have much of a bench, but they're going to be really good when it comes to what their starting 5, and then maybe 1 or 2 guys are coming off of the bench. If they're not good, then the season ends up in disappointment, and that's the way that it goes. It's kind of the way Kentucky used to operate with freshmen, but instead of bringing them as 18-year-olds, you've seen them at the college level either fail or succeed for a couple of years before you're giving them that opportunity. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And, like, if we wanted to have a conversation about Mizzou hoops, and what this means for them, I absolutely think NIL plus transfer portal makes a team specifically in Mizzou's position in a much more uniquely qualified position to succeed than they would have been in previous years, where you're just trying to compete with McDonald's All-Americans every year. That's tougher for Mizzou. Now I think you can bring in guys with NIL, with opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to get. Mizzou football is different. And I don't think it levels the playing field between Mizzou and Alabama, or Mizzou in Tennessee, or Mizzou in Georgia in any real meaningful way, honestly. I think the one area that it helps for Mizzou, and I think people have kind of understated this, honestly, Mizzou's defensive players didn't just like come back for no reason.
Right.
They came back because they are getting NIL opportunities, you know? So like that helps. But otherwise, I don't think it really changes much for them.
I mean, I think Missouri's NIL situation is certainly better than I thought it was, and probably better than what most people think. Programs like Alabama and LSU and Tennessee, like, not only do they have people who are fully bought in, but they have concentrated wealth that goes purely to their football programs. Like, it is, you are doing something wrong if you cannot succeed at those schools. And I've always just assumed, we've seen it, that there's a little bit of apathy from the money folks in Missouri sphere. There's other things that they invest in. There's other things they're interested in. But I think what we've seen is that Missouri can at least, maybe not the 5 stars, maybe not the 4 stars, but for the really good 3 stars and a couple of the blue bloods or blue chippers, yeah, we got some funds to throw around. We can bring you in. We can build a pretty decent team based off of that. We're not going to outbid everybody, but we can offer something a little bit different, offer you playing time, some compensation, and a really fun scheme, because it's not always about the money. There's a lot of guys who go places just for the experience or, the possibility to play with a certain coach or certain guys. So if Missouri can offer that, yeah, it's going to help. It's going to help. But you don't, no matter what the transfer portal can do or what NIL can do, overhauling a 108-man roster, there's no shortcut, man. Like, maybe you cut off a year or two, but like, you're not flipping it. Okay. Now you can definitely do it in basketball, and that's just easier that way. But man, I don't know. I love the idea. I love the concept of like, we can escape the same 6 teams playing in the national championship every year. Like, I like that concept. I don't think that means that it's going to happen. We saw with TCU, which has way more money than you think they do. But it comes down to, trying to level it out with the transfer portal, trying to make monetary opportunities through NIL, and then expanding the playoff. Frankly, just giving more teams opportunity, that's really going to spread that talent out. Because instead of kids in California saying, well, there's no way in hell I can go to Oregon State and end up in the national championship. Hell, I can't even go to USC and end up in the playoff. I can't do that right now. I'm Bryce Young. I got to go to Alabama to do this. Instead of that, you're opening multiple pathways where you have a West Coast team, or maybe more teams from the East Coast, or, like Michigan is not really a woe is me team, but like, usually they weren't getting into these sorts of things, and now they can when they expanded it just a little bit. Imagine how many mid-level players, like in Oregon, like at TCU, maybe like a Missouri who gets lucky a couple of years in the SEC, can do when you expand that playoff, and you have these opportunities to bag some bigger players and kind of distribute some money, distribute the opportunities to guys who are looking to play and can't cut it at the Alabamas or the Ohio States. That's where you find the inefficiencies, and then you got to hope to get lucky a couple of years, and then maybe it'll come out your way.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like, if you expand the playoff, that is where it's honestly kind of artificial, but that's where the parity comes in, because then suddenly you're allowing more teams to contend in a 1-game sample. And like, we've seen this in the past. Appalachian State can beat Michigan in a 1-game sample size. We've had upsets in 1-game samples where like South Carolina suddenly beats Tennessee on a weird game, or Mizzou is 5 minutes away from beating Georgia last year, right? I mean, teams can keep up for 60 minutes. Over the course of a 12-game season, though, it's unlikely that those lesser teams will be able to sustain over the course of the life of that season. So it's really just about expanding the playoff. That's where you get kind of built-in artificial parity. I think college basketball is honestly that way to a large degree. Like, in a one-game sample size in the NCAA tournament, can FAU go out there and pull off some crazy upset? Sure. Can UMBC go out there and beat Virginia? Absolutely. We've seen it, right? That's what makes the tournament great, is that you can have these no-name schools that we've literally never heard of before in our entire lives go up against Duke, and they beat them. Lehigh can beat Duke. It brings back horror stories in my mind, but Norfolk State can come into the NCAA tournament and beat Missouri. This stuff happens. It's not to that degree in college football, but you can have stories like that in the college football playoff, but you have to expand it to be able to allow those teams in to get those types of games.
You have to expand it, and then you got to wait 5 or 6 years so that players realize that there's multiple avenues to, if a championship is important to you, there are multiple avenues to get there. So, but yeah, I mean, look, these things are good. It is completely taken a blowtorch to everything we knew about college football growing up. The whole, red shirts are going to be awesome next year, and it's like 4-year builds, and that's like, throw that out. That doesn't exist anymore. And there is some sadness. I'll speak for me. There is some sadness in my mind where I don't get to live in that world anymore. At the same time, I would prefer my players to be able to, get paid for being awesome, have these opportunities available to them. And if a coach, lures them in with a false bill of sale and then bails once the second they get on campus, no, if they don't want to be there, then they should leave. And guess what? Just because they leave, it also means that you can pick some guys up who also got that. So it works both ways. And I am happier for the players. I don't know where it's going to end up. I don't think the changes are done. Even when we're talking about playoff expansion and NIL and all that stuff, I think there's going to be more changes that come through. I don't know what that's going to look like. But in the end, as long as it's making it in a level playing field, I'm okay with it. Because again, the big joke about college football is that Alabama, Missouri, New Mexico State are all claiming to play the same sport. They're not. That's just not how it works. If we can level that a little bit, it might be weird, it might be uncomfortable, but in the end, that's kind of what we're looking for, just to get a fair shot.
Just to put this in further context, like when we talked about the basketball versus football side of things and how difficult it is to compete in football compared to how, like, marginally speaking, these are all big numbers, but marginally speaking, it is easier to get good at college basketball with the money that you're investing. Mm-hmm. So this is from 2022 and 2021. The highest spending college football program was Ohio State at $215 million. South Carolina was 25th at $133 million. On the basketball side of things, the highest operating expenses was Kentucky at $22 million. Second in the country was Tennessee at 14. So, like, it is not the same thing. Mississippi State was in the top 15, and they were spending $8 million. Mizzou was this is in the SEC. Mizzou was, like, middle of the pack at $10 million spent on the basketball program in the SEC. Like, it's just, that is not comparable. You could times Kentucky's operating expenses by 10, and you get to what Ohio State is on the football side of things. Investing a little bit goes a long way in college basketball. You have to be ready to go all in on college football to really play with the big boys.
Yeah. I'm not saying we give up football, but man, when you put numbers like that, it's like, maybe we should be a basketball school. God. It's a lot
not hard to see why they're investing so much NIL on the basketball side of things. I'll say that much. Like,
I'm okay with it.
You invest a few $100,000 in players here or there, and you suddenly have a roster that can do a lot for you. Like, look at what Miami did this year. Miami basketball ended up in the Final Four this year. I think it was reported they spent like $200,000 on Nigel Pack, something like that. Nigel Pack is a really good guard for them that scored a lot of points for them this year. He helps them get to the Final Four. That is the best $200,000 you've ever spent. Like, they might have spent $1 million on their roster this year. I don't know exactly what a team gets, program gets, a university gets out of a Final Four run. probably increases that tenfold in terms of the revenue that they're getting off of that, whether it's specifically from the advertising that gives them, or because of the enrollment numbers that boost like crazy. I mean, we saw at Mizzou after 2007, it was their largest freshman class ever. Why was that? I don't know. What happened in 2007?
The Flutie effect. That's what happened.
So these kinds of things matter, and it's just easier to do on the basketball side of things, unfortunately.
Yep. Sports are nothing but an advertising tool. That's all it is. And that's why schools are okay with investing in it. So, man, it is an off-season show, 50 minutes. I'm feeling good about this, man. Any last parting shots before we get out of here?
I don't think so. Hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll have some news on the A, recruiting front, but B, transfer front. I think that opens up, early May?
Hey, yep.
So we're not next show, but the show after that, we should have some kind of news or at least updates when it comes to the transfer portal. The other thing to keep in mind, spring ball's still going on at some places right now. There are going to be other guys that enter the portal that thought they were going to be starters at the end of spring that didn't end up getting the same opportunity that they were expecting, and maybe a center comes out of the portal that way, or maybe a new edge rusher comes out of the portal that way. There's going to be new players that show themselves, and we'll see what that ends up looking like for Mizzou.
Yeah, can't wait to see it. That's going to be our show for today. As always, we appreciate the downloads and the subscriptions. Leave a comment or rate us. We love all types of feedback from you all. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Nate G. Edwards. He is at BK Sports Talk. Of course, you can follow the Rockin' Flagship at Rockin' Nation and our podcasting outlet at Rockin' Radio. I never get to say this. I'm going to say it here. Smash that subscribe button. Oh, man. Anyway, we appreciate you tuning in this time. We'll try to do better next time. And until then, MIZ.
ZOU.